Hello and welcome. Today we are going to talk about the cinematic image. In cinema, shooting is a very important aspect, and shooting means shooting with a camera. Whereas the camera and the entire process is called cinematography. The term cinematography comes from the Greek roots, which means writing with motion. At the heart of filmmaking is shooting, but cinematography is more than mere photographing. It is the process of taking ideas, words, actions, emotional subtext, tone, and all other forms of non-verbal communications and rendering them in visual terms. When we create a film project, one of our primary tasks is to create a visual world for the characters to inhabit. The visual world is an important part of how the audience will perceive the story, how they will understand the characters and the motivations. However, in this lecture, we are not going to talk about how the camera functions, how it renders images through the use of lights, lens, etc. But we are going to concentrate more on the conceptual tool of cinematography, which is the frame. In films, television, video, laptops, computers, mobile phones, in fact, wherever a screen is involved, in whatever mode of communication where the screen is involved, the frame becomes the most important aspect. Most of the people actually don't watch the frame. For them, a frame, the right hand and the left hand side of the frame are like bookends. The top and the bottom are like the ceiling and the floor. What they watch through the frame is somehow there is a hole, and through the hole they actually watch the action that the people are doing, or the person, face of the person who's doing the talking. They actually don't watch the frame lines. They get into the action and sit and relax and enjoy the show. Quite possibly, we do not question the existence of the strong horizontal and vertical borders around the images because we are so accustomed to them. Yet these perfectly perpendicular lines that we take for granted do not exist anywhere in nature, which is the reason why Rudolf Arnhem labels them Cartesian coordinates. For him, indeed, the use of rigid lines visibly raptures the fraternity of all things in nature through a promotion of only few of its aspects. In other words, we isolate certain features at the expense of others. From this, we should learn that these perpendicular lines press upon us a very unnatural way of seeing. That is, the end product is a cultural display rather than an indigenous phenomenon. In painting and in still photography, the frame often supports the subject matter. For instance, a distance landscape will have a very dominant horizontal kind of framing, whereas a steep building or, for instance, waterfalls will have a strong vertical shape. Whereas in word processing softwares, when you're using in the computers, we still have the option of aligning your page in the landscape mode or a portrait mode. But when it comes to film, the frame is quite fixed. And in films, we use the term aspect ratio whenever we talk about the size of the frame. The relationship between the width and the height of the frame is called the aspect ratio and is derived by dividing the width of the frame by the height. There are several different aspect ratios used in film. The aspect ratio of a full frame of 35 mm film, 16 mm film and broadcast standard video is 1.33:1. In film, this is called academic aperture. In video parlance, this ratio is expressed as 4:3. In any case, the horizontal width is 1/3 longer than the vertical height. Movies intended for the theatrical release on film or HD TV broadcast are shot with a different aspect ratio, which elongates the horizontal dimension. The American theatrical release aspect ratio is 1.85:1. The European theatrical release aspect ratio is 1.66:1 and the HD TV broadcast aspect ratio is 16:9 or 1.78:1. Now, working within the parameters of a given aspect ratio, a filmmaker has got a broad range of aesthetic choices that he can exercise. There are no fixed rules concerning visual style, except that the style should emerge from the script and from the creative choices the filmmaker is trying to exercise or make. Each compositional principles is expressed in very precise term, so it is necessary to use the proper terminology when applying them to the script or communicating them to the crew. One of the things is the open frame and the closed frame. What do we call an open frame? What do we call, first to begin with, a closed frame? A closed frame means where all the essential information in that shot is neatly contained within the frame. And an open frame is just the opposite, where the audience gets the feel that there are something beyond the edge of the frame. So a shot can begin looking like a closed frame and can gradually become, by the introducing of a character or a sound, or for instance movement of the camera, an open frame. So that's one aspect. Another one, we have the deep frames and the flat frames. This is another very important aspect in the frame, and we should discuss that, how this is made. Now, what is depth? While we see a frame is a flat two-dimensional object which has got an x-axis and a y-axis. The depth is created by creating the illusion of the z-axis. Now, when you accentuate this particular axis, you get the field appears deep. But when you flatten this particular aspect, like the z-axis, the frame becomes flat. Now, according to your need, you accentuate or flat the frame. Like you accentuate the z-axis by placing objects in the foreground, midground, and background. So in the similar way, you flatten by taking away objects and putting the character against a wall, flattens the object. There is something we called objective overlapping, which is the understanding that the objects near the foreground will particularly cover or overlap objects further in the background. Also related to the notion of receding plane is diminishing perspective, which is the perceptual understanding that objects will appear smaller when they are away, further from the camera. Similarly, we have this word called foreshortening. When a same object, which one part is in front of the camera, will appear big, and the other part of the object, which is going away from camera, will be stretched maybe to some more in the background. So that is how also we accentuate the frame, which is known as foreshortening. Horizontal and diagonal lines also play an important fact. When shot head-on, a horizontal line always appears horizontal, obviously. But taken from a little angle, the horizontal line would appear to recede in the background. That also creates a depth. This is a simple but powerful way of creating a sense of deep space. Deep space is also done by focusing your camera. At times, everything when is in sharp focus, we get the sense of deep space. The foreground, midground, background, everything we can see clear, distinctly becomes a sense of deep space. Similarly, when the focus is just on a plane, the foreground, the object in front or in the back are in a blur, this also creates a shallow focus. So by alternating between this, actually it's where the narrative is created. Another important aspect is shadows. Shadows add depth to just about any image because they accentuate the dimensionality of your subject and their environment. So similarly, eliminating shadow will also give you a flat image. We now come to balanced and unbalanced frames. One has to understand that the placement of an object in your frame carries always a weight. Any object in the frame carries a weight. And this weight is in the term of its placement, size, shape, brightness, for all these reasons. So, how you distribute these objects in the frame would create a balanced frame or an unbalanced frame as it is required by the script. Rule of the thirds is the next particular point that we come. Now, cinematic compositions, as with any other art forms, has certain classical principles that have developed over time. Film being a two-dimensional representational art form, developed after painting and still photography, has been influenced by many of their ideas of classical forms. One such idea is the rule of the third, which is often used as a guide for framing human subjects and for composition in general. Now, what is rule of the third? You divide the horizontally the frame into three equal parts and also vertically into three equal parts. These cross sections are known as sweet spots. Now, whenever you are framing a subject, you frame it in certain way that the eyes of the subject, for instance, will be on the top half of the third line. So there it becomes interesting and people watch it, the audience watch it more clearly. Similarly, if a character is moving, we always keep a headroom and place the character in the third line of the frame. In that way, we can also adjust at certain times when a character is making a sudden movement, maybe a turning, the camera framing is done in certain way so that the character always occupies the third line, which is known as the rule of the third. In our discussion about frame, now we come to shot size. Shot size refers to the size of the object within the frame. The size of your subject is determined by two factors. One is the proximity of the subject to the camera, like the nearer to the camera, the subject will appear big, the size will be big. Away from camera, it will appear smaller. And the second way of shot size is using the magnification of the lens. When your lens is magnifying a subject, it will appear big, and when it's not magnifying, it will appear smaller. These two approaches are not the same. Dramatically speaking, one selects a shot size depending on the narrative emphasis, the emotional impact needed, the visual information needed in a particular shot, in a particular moment of the story. Most films are made of a wide variety of shot sizes. The frame of reference to any discussion of shot sizes usually refers to the human form. But the following shot designations that we are going to talk about can be applied to non-human forms as well. The very first one we'll start with is called the extreme long shot, or ELS. This is also known as the wide shot, which shows a large, like the name suggests, where we can see the location, setting, or landscape. Even if there are people in this, but the emphasis is more on showing the location. Next, we come to long shot, or LS, which is generally a shot that contains the whole human figure. It is a very good shot when you are largely showing an action or physical movement, etc. We come next to a medium long shot, which is MLS, which frames your subject knees up, which is also known as the cowboy shot, because in the westerns, the cowboy had to be shown, their gun had to be shown, so they had to shoot their characters knee up. The French also calls this the American shot. There is medium shot, MS, which frames your subject from approximately waist up. The shot now can show smaller physical actions, facial expressions, yet maintain to some extent a connection with the surrounding. However, the location is clearly not the objective while you are using this kind of shot. A medium close-up, MCU, is generally from the chest or shoulders up. The emphasis of the shot now is facial expression. A close-up places the primary emphasis on the face or other part of the body. Small details in features, movements, and expressions are the subject of this intimate shot. An extreme close-up, or ECU, is stylishly potent shot that isolates a very small detail or feature of the subject, where the location setting is not the emphasis at all. Apart from that, there are 2 shots, 3 shots, and group shots. At these levels, clearly states when there are 2 subjects, there is a 2 shot. The 3 shots includes 3 subjects, and more than 3 is usually termed as group shots. We now come to camera angles. The orientation of the camera to the subject, the horizontal and the vertical angles that you are shooting from, has a tremendous impact on the dramatics of the whole subject, no matter what size of the subject is. For instance, when the camera, first we take the vertical axis. For instance, when the camera is at eye level, which is right now, the way this is being shot, which is the way the audience can connect very easily. But the camera goes slightly up or down, creates a high angle shot, or when it goes down, a low angle shot. So while the eye level shot connects, the extreme high angle or the low angle shots becomes remote. The horizontal position of the camera also plays a significant role here. We have something called the direct address. That is when your subject is looking directly at the lens. Although it's a very common thing you find in news, in television, in music videos, but in narrative, direct address is used for a special effect, like when the character is as if looking at the audience and the third wall is removed. Generally in narrative, the characters look slightly at the edge of the frame in order to create another kind of intimacy. In that way, horizontally, if your camera is moving, it's moving a 3/4 frontal, then it goes into profile, it can go into 3/4 back, and finally shooting from behind. In this process, slowly you find it creates a tremendous impact, and it removes, like when it's front, the connection is strong. As it moves away behind, the connection gets reduced. Apart from that, you also tilt the camera at times laterally, what is called as a Dutch angle. This also creates a special dramatic impact depending on the slight imbalance of the frame. Apart from that, we have got the moving frame. The camera is not always static. Obviously, 2 static shots, if you can put together when they are edited, creates different perspectives. But at times, it's required that within the same shot, the camera moves from one subject, from one space to another, from a subject to an object, to create a link, which is called the camera movement. Now there are 2 kinds of camera movements. One is the pivot moves, which is also known as the stationary camera move. That is, the camera can be on a tripod or handheld, but the location of the camera is not shifted. The camera can accordingly pan, which is going left to right or right to left, or tilt, going from top to bottom or from bottom to top. And there is another thing which we call where the camera itself moves, which are known as track shots. Apart from that, we have got the booming shot where you can have the camera move on a crane. It can go up, it can go down. So there is a difference between the tilt where the camera is static and when the camera itself is moving. All these moves often combine to create impact in cinema.